the key tip to success is really understand the context and your team really deeply, asking the right questions during the onboarding. So understanding where you stand and also understanding where you want to go to is definitely going to set you up for success, because if you don't ask, especially when you start, if you don't ask the right questions and you don't understand where you're going, you can then start building many things, but then you just build a rocket that then sits in your garage.
Well, Ben, it was great to have you on, first of all. It was really fun to record an episode together. But great to have Julian, our guest, as well, and talk about starting a research team from scratch, which I think is something a lot of people certainly working in startups have had the opportunity to do, or maybe are interested in doing in the future, and can be really intimidating. So great to kind of talk through a framework for how to think about it and the things you might want to think about, knowing, of course, the approach is going to vary a lot depending on the situation you're entering.
Yeah, and I think for folks who might even find themselves at big enterprises, it can sometimes feel like you're a team of one.
Sure.
If you're very spread out or dispersed globally or internationally, or if it's very siloed. I think a lot of the things that Julian talks about in this episode, you can apply to your team, even if you're not yet a team of one. There's really great strategies around building bridges, engaging stakeholders. He has a nice breakdown between insight hubs and repositories. I love when someone's got a specific definition for those sorts of things, because it helps turn these things we hear so much about into like practical to-do list items for folks.
Awesome. All right, let's give it a listen. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Awkward Silences. Today we're here with Julian Della Mattia. He's the re-ops specialist at the 180 and a senior UX researcher at Meister. Today we're going to be talking about something that I'm pretty sure is relevant to most of you, or has been in your career, or will be in the future, and that is building research teams from scratch. So lots to cover here. Julian, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. My pleasure.
And we've got Ben here too.
Hey, everybody.
Awesome. All right. So you've done this multiple times, so you know what you're talking about. That is building a research practice, research ops from scratch. We're going to get into a lot of detail, but just kind of starting off, what's a good approach to even think about how to get started for people who find themselves in this boat?
Well, probably the first thing I would say is you need to approach it with the right mindset. And for me, or the way I perceive the first researcher should be, I always use a sport analogy here. So it's instead of being, a striker, someone who wants to score, you need to be kind of a playmaker. You need to change the way you approach research. And the reason I use this analogy is because many researchers, when they're the first one, they think, okay, fine, I need to jump straight to hands-on work. I need to tackle projects. I need to then, do stuff. Sometimes it's the case because maybe the company hired you because they had a pile of projects that they needed to work on. But if you just focus on the hands-on work, you might be missing out on the opportunity to actually work on setting up the practice and actually, alleviating your work down the road. Plus, when you're the only researcher, it's just you, right? So you need to then, there's probably a lot of requests around or a lot of research happening. Sometimes, like, let's say the traditional research, or what a researcher would consider research or formal research, or maybe not to the standard, but there's probably some things happening. You have probably a team like trying to do a survey, or some people talking to customers. And when you come in, it's important to try to, instead of absorb all that, saying, okay, fine, how can I, as the first researcher, help that become better? How can I help the rest of the team step up their game? That's why I usually use the playmaker analogy. Okay, fine. I have some teammates. I need to help them play better. I have to organize the player. And I can, help them overall learn better and perform some research better. So the first thing I would advise is this little mindset shift. Being the first researcher is a very special type of challenge, so to say.
Right. So being the only researcher, the first one there, you're going to have to score some goals, but you're not going to do research alone. And you want to be setting your future self up for success, but also working with the team to make great things happen.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, of course, with what I'm saying, I'm not saying like, okay, you should not conduct any hands-on work or not research. Of course not. There's probably part of your time that will be dedicated to that, and that's great, because you also need to score some goals and show some victories here, and also some wins that you can show the team. Okay, this is how research works, or can work, or could work, and this is the value research can deliver. So you of course need to do that bit. But sometimes, folks kind of get lost in this part, and then they don't work on the rest. And the rest, it's a wide space. It's building the practice, building the knowledge, the culture, understanding how other people interact with research, setting up, for example, participant management. So it's a little bit of, as you said at the beginning, it's a little bit of operations and research itself. So it's a kind of like you have to wear many hats as a first researcher. So there's definitely, what you said, this is a bit of both scoring goals and helping the team play.
So how do you recommend, you've got the right mindset, right? So that's good. That's always essential. How do you get started? Prioritization is always going to be a priority in business for anybody, but particularly when you're one person, it's very, very important. So how do you think about the different vectors of prioritization, about I'm stepping into this kind of organization, which is different than this kind of organization? Where do I use my time best, say that first 30, 60, 90 days, or to get started for success?
Okay. The first piece of homework actually starts during the interview process when you're interviewing for this role. So really, really, before you even sign a contract, you should kind of ask the right questions, so you know exactly where you're walking into, and what's the challenge, what's the company like, how are people understanding or thinking of research, what do they want to learn, what are their priorities, and so on. So probably, since it's the interview process, you probably won't be able to know most of the things, because you're still not part of the team, but you can assess more or less what kind of flavor of a challenge you're dealing with. That's the first bit, because then when you join, and I'm gonna say something very researchy, which is it depends. In some organizations the first bit that influence that is, okay, are you being hired or brought in by a design lead or a research lead or a VP of product? How large is the organization? It changes a lot. So there are many reasons why they could bring in a researcher. So that's the first thing to consider. And when you come in and you have to prioritize, it depends on what the company is facing at. Maybe they hired a researcher because they had many things they wanted to learn, and they have, many big projects upcoming, or many big ideas, and okay, we want to make better decisions in this way. Or maybe they hire a researcher because it was trendy to hire one. You can have both worlds, both ends. So within, let's imagine, okay, they bring you in and they know what, more or less, you have a couple of allies that know what research is and how research works. I normally try to separate the hands-on research work versus the operational work, and I try to allot capacity for both. Maybe when you're starting out, probably you won't have like 50-50. Sometimes you will have maybe one quarter focus more on operational side and maybe another one more on hands-on work. But I try to make space for both. And from the hands-on perspective, maybe you have some projects that are waiting for you. That's why I said it's important if they bring you for something. Or maybe you can get, when you're talking to people, you can really quickly understand or gauge, okay, this is what they're looking for. This is what they need now. So you can tackle those right away. And of course, you always prioritize based on company objectives and what they're trying to achieve and potential impact and so on. Of course, you don't want to. Sometimes, if the buy-in research is really low, you can go and tackle that usability testing. That doesn't sound so appealing, but sometimes, okay, if you have many things that you could pick, maybe you go for stuff that has a little bit more juice and has more potential in the company strategy or the company objectives or what they want to achieve. And then the operational bit, I always try to assess where we stand in that regard. What are the things that we can improve, so we can map up, for example, the research process and find some potential pain points there, by also talking to people and understand how, if there's any research being conducted, what kind of research, what are some, like, our teams maybe doing differently, because maybe you can map, okay, the design team is doing this now, but maybe, I don't know, customer success is also talking to customers in a different way, with a completely different tool set, or so assessing that is one bit. And then once you have a first understanding of of where do you stand in terms of operation, then I always try to chunk stuff into smaller pieces so you can tackle them bit by bit. And what do I mean with this? Sometimes when you want to work on something that is operations, it might be a large project that involves many parties. And many of these things maybe take time. So you need to allot some capacity and then do step one. And then the next quarter, maybe you do step two. And then so you start because maybe, and I can give an example of this. For example, building a participant panel is a common thing it's a common topic in operations, right? And yeah, you have many steps you need to do. You need to probably set up your terms and conditions, maybe set up the mailing list, maybe even a landing page. And so these are many steps. And then you also need people to sign up. So you could, it's not so straightforward. So you say, okay, fine, this. It also depends on many teams. Maybe the mailing tool is lies or sits under CRM. So you need to then, have different stakeholders. So doing this chopping this into smaller pieces helps you fit it better when you have to prioritize work. So it's okay, fine. Now we just work on the TNCs, this queue, because I also have all these research projects here. Mm-hmm. Then next queue, I go this way. So you also make, time and space for that to happen.
Julian, I'm struck by how for some companies, when they hire their first researcher, they might also only have a handful of engineers and maybe one product manager. And so silos, as we think about them at a larger org, might not have been established. You hear from research operations and user researchers that they're sort of combating some of those silos when they try to get their insights actioned or buy-in and budget. Do you think that you being a UXR of one has an opportunity to sort of build bridges with your partners and stakeholders? I mean, I know that's a key thing of what we'll probably talk about later with research ops, but I guess at a high level, how do you think about building those bridges when you've been brought in as a researcher of one on a team? Are you, when you're asking about those projects that the PMs want to work on, are you also taking a moment to say, and here is how I'm going to, work against that problem and why? Are you taking those moments for education? How are you making it, I guess, a team sport?
That's a really good question. And I think it's not a question of, okay, how should you start? It's actually your only choice, to be honest.
Got it.
You need to build those bridges. And this, I also want to make a little note here. Sometimes you're the first researcher and then you're meant to scale the team. So you're the first one to step in and then, okay, fine, you will be the first of 5, 6, 7, who knows. Mm-hmm. But sometimes it's not just, you're not only the first, but you will be the only one. And it's a little different. And that's why I say that building these bridges is actually key. So the way, and going back to this, we can change the playmaker to a connector if you want. Basically, you need to also help connect the knowledge of all teams and help teams learn better. Because I think learning about the user, the problem space, the market is something that, we can be the specialists. And of course, there may be also market researchers or so. We can be the ones, taking the lead on this. But I think that overall learning as a company would make the whole company make better decisions and therefore make better products in the long run. So if you start talking about how this starts with the decisions that you need to make and what are the things you need to decide on, how can you be sure, you're never 100% sure, but how can you reduce, or how can you make your certainty increase to a certain extent that you can make better or more solid decisions. When you start putting this in motion and you talk to people and you explain it this way, it doesn't happen overnight. It's not that you just do a project and this is how it works, but you need to slowly start building that. In the case when you are you have one PM and engineers, I think one key thing here, and I go back to when you just start as a researcher, when you land, I think the onboarding bit, the first 30 days are a golden opportunity for researchers. Well, mostly you have a golden opportunity for other roles too, but now we're talking about just researchers. So when you just arrive, you have this aura, and you can get away with asking stupid questions if you want, and you get to talk to a lot of people. You get let meet this one, so you meet a lot of people, and you can ask them, okay, what do you think about research? You have experience with research. How do you? Why did you make this decision? What do you make your decision? What do you base your decisions on? All these things. And I think that understanding this while onboarding is great because this will then guide you or serve as a roadmap. Okay, this is how we need to approach this. So to build this culture, you need to start. Okay, you need to understand where you stand as a team or as a company overall. Where does the company and the team stand in terms of research? How do they perceive it? What are their doubts? What are their concerns? Do they trust research? Will they come later on and say, you only talk to 2 users, maybe, to this kind of questions. Well, 2 is, I would even question 2. I mean, to 5 or 10, But yeah, this is something that building these bridges is something that is key for your success.
So Julian, I hear you saying, regardless if you are a first and maybe last researcher in your organization or the first of many, building these bridges is going to be essential to your success. And before you even join an organization, you want to kind of start with, well, A, is this an organization I want to join for whatever reasons might be on your list? But what kind of business problems can I help solve right away once I get started? And then you're going to kind of continue understanding that once you do get started, in part through these stakeholder conversations, which includes not only further understanding that kind of business problem situation, but also on a meta level, where are we with research? What research is happening? What's working about it or not? What's the ops situation? Is everything a mess, or is it already sort of organized for what it is? And then you can kind of move forward. It sounds down really 2 paths, one on the ops side and one on the execution of research side. And then we get into prioritizing. And you talked a little bit about this, but maybe we could talk a little bit more about how you think about, is it 50-50, 60-40, and how that might change, over time in your organization.
Mm-hmm. That's a great summary of what we discussed so far. In terms of prioritizing ops versus hands-on research, the first conversation you need to have is with leadership. Okay, what are our plans in the future? Because it changes really a lot if you are, building a team and you're just the first one, and you then need to onboard 5 researchers. So first of all, what are the hiring plans? Because if it's like, fine, I join in January and then we will hire 4 researchers in April, May, that's going to really change my roadmap in terms of hands-on work versus operations, unless we just go with it and see how it goes. But it's not it's not really a good idea when you have to build infrastructure for all those researchers. So first, probably talking to your manager or like senior management. It depends on how your organization, on your org chart, how many levels you have. But the highest you can go and say, okay, what are the plans for research? What's the budget? And so assess a little bit what's the overarching idea, and then also asking for the research side, what are the company priorities now? What are the plans? Maybe the business wants to go, or the product, where are we taking the product in the upcoming, horizon or even year? So assessing that and working backwards from that can also help you. Okay, these are the things we need to actually, find out. And it comes back to decisions. Okay, what are the key decisions that you need to make? This Q, next Q, this H1, H2. So you can have this conversation and then from there see, okay, these are the things that are a must. These are the things that maybe are, not so relevant. And then you can then start balancing. And when you have both and both, you can then see, okay, fine, you need to work considering time. I said there's some things that will take time to build. If you need to set up participant management, and one of the things is building a panel. I'm coming back to the panel again, but it's a really useful example for all these things. It will take 6 months to maybe even 8 or 9 to have it, filled and working. So you start early on, do you some of the steps, and you let it then grow like a plant. You water it a little bit every Q, and then it grows. So you also need to play with time. So where do you need to get from here till H1, H2, and then work backwards from there. So connecting both sides, plans and company objectives.
Julian, you've mentioned now panels twice, and I hope we can dig in a bit more as to why you think participant panels are really useful for smaller, scrappier teams. You're talking about a lot of different things. Again, as any startup or early stage company, the employees are balancing roadmaps, strategies, trying to figure out if they'll get budget for another year. And researchers, no doubt, are balancing all those things too. In your experience, though, is there a system or a process or something that teams of one or small research teams ought to be building or should be building at the outset, but they often don't because of time? Is there something that they could be doing in those early stages that will really pay dividends if and when they get more budget, or their team grows, or they're given a big meaty project? What from your experience are some of the things that you would encourage folks to think about building as they're, again, building the rocket, flying the rocket, figuring out how to buy fuel for the rocket, etc.?
Probably the thing that I would say is really worth investing time and effort in is connecting insights from across teams. Participant panel is also something useful. A repository is something useful, but this is something that actually exists, and this is connected to the capacity you have as a research team of one, or as a sole researcher. As researchers, we are finders. We dig out. Let's say we find information. We dig out. But at some point we are only limited to the capacity we have and the hours we have. But we are not the only ones talking to customers. We're not the only customer-facing team.
Right.
So there are other teams, and they're really a goldmine. So if you have customer support, customer success, sales, data, there's so many touch points that you can actually have or take insights out of. And also they could also use, because sometimes, and we go back to the silos, sometimes they're not connected. So maybe sales doesn't know what customer success know, and they don't know what research is doing, and they don't know what product actually plans on launching. So maybe they're not connected. So connecting or creating an infrastructure to connect all this is gonna make a big difference. It won't be easy, because you need to kind of get everybody on the same page and explain why we're doing this, why are we collecting information in one place, what's the so it's a little bit of a tough sell, but once you get the buy-in, it really makes a lot of difference, because you start building channels to make your understanding and your learning better. We go back to what the goal, in my perspective, what research should be about is learning better, understanding the user, the problem space, and the market better, so we can make better decisions. So then from there, we can then find different channels, and we can say, okay, fine, we do more work ourselves. But if you want to do it at team sport, and also you want to make the most, because there are many people talking to customers. So if you want to make the most out of that, and you want to make your insights juicier, you want to triangulate, and you want to have different sources. So creating these streams can really make a difference. And this is something I would encourage people to start talking about from the start, from the get-go.
Julian, it sounds like that could be its own episode easily, but maybe we could talk just a little bit about how to start to tackle this question of connecting those dots across organizations, because it is a juicy, meaty topic, and I'm sure one a lot of people are thinking through, whether they're on small or large teams. But any quick tips there to help people execute on connecting those dots? Okay,
the first thing that I will say, it needs a lot of conversations, and it needs a lot of politics too. This is the probably the unhappy part. It's okay, fine. Sometimes you need to do what you need to do. So the first step is to identify and map which are the customer facing teams, or the teams that could produce some sort of findings, insights, you name it. So understanding who they are and who are the point of contact, and then have individual conversations with each team and explaining, okay, this is what I want to do, this is what I need to build. The reason is this, because I want to create this common understanding and kind of overhaul the knowledge finding and all the curation of knowledge. I want to be the curator of knowledge. And then understanding what kind of information they can provide, what kind of information they would need, and the frequency. So the cadence, if you want. For example, you go and you talk to customer success and you say, okay, fine. Tell me a little bit about how you talk to customers, how often, what kind of context, what kind of questions do you ask? For example, do you go over support tickets and you create a report every month, every 2 weeks? And then you can probably gauge, okay, they do because most teams do, okay, fine, they do voice of customer, they do voice of or CS something. So they always have their report. Sometimes it's monthly, sometimes it's quarterly. So you can probably say, okay, fine, this is fine if we do it once a month, it's okay. And then you ask them, because this is a two-way street. So if you want to create a process that collects insights. Not only teams need to provide those insights, you also need to give them something, because the usually is like, what's in it for me, and that's the reason why silos exist. Okay, fine, I do my job, I put the report on Slack, or I send a newsletter, and that's it. And what's in it for them, and okay, what are the insights they could use, for example? And one clear example of this is sometimes sales doesn't know exactly what happens in the product roadmap, for example. So if you can then start connecting both ends, they could say, okay, fine, we can give you all the reasons why we win or we lose deals. Customers we're losing leads because we don't have this, or because we're lacking this, or because we're losing to this competitor, right? Or we won because we're really good at this. It's like, fine, can you give me that every month? And then you can also connect, and then you go to product and say, okay, how can you give me visibility on the product roadmap? And so you start connecting all this. So basically, the conversation was also around 3 points. What can you give me? What do you need? And how often can you give me, and how often do you need? So 4 actually.
Yep.
And then you can start building everything. Probably you won't be able to bring everybody on board, because then you will have like an avalanche of insights from all teams. So start with the teams that you have, that you probably build the relationship the earliest, or that are keen on doing this. So try to find those allies, and then once you have 2-3 teams on board in this process, then it's easy to showcase to the other, look, with customer support or success and sales and product, we're doing this little thingy here. So look at how we benefit look at our insights are triangulated now. So you can mark this came from support, and we connected it with this research insight. And then people will actually come on board. It takes time, but it's super effective in the long run.
Julian, so I hear you saying you're kind of facilitating in this role the communication of insights, learnings across these different departments, which might involve a repository down the line, or different meetings or reports. I'm sure this could take many different forms. Hopefully it becomes a little more, if not automated, routine over time, how this is all working. Where does user research fit into this, and projects that you're running as a team of 1 or more, and surfacing and bringing those insights to these teams? Is that part of the same system, or do you think of that separately?
No, that's definitely part of that system, and that also helps give visibility to your work without going to each team and say, yeah, this is what we found out. So one example, you can build this. I'm really very, very basic. You can go on Miro, or you can go to FigJam, and you can create a board, and you can ask teams to put stuff there. You can have a separate section for UX research. And then they can also see, okay, for example, these are the insights that we got from this set of interviews, 15 interviews for this project. You have them there. I think it's another source, and it's another channel, of another customer-facing team. So I don't think it has something different. The only difference maybe for me is I start from there to connect the insights. So I start from the insights that I got, and then I look for other things to triangulate maybe, and even and the other way around, when I maybe want to suggest proactively a research project, so I go and check the other way around. Okay, fine, what happened in other teams? Is there something here that can I spot a trend, or can I spot something like a thread that I could pull? Okay, and then I go and research about that. So it goes 2 ways, but for me it's either the end or the start. That's the only difference. But I'm the researcher, so of course that's my take. But yeah, it's definitely another source. Yeah.
And Julian, in prepping for our conversation, I was looking at some of your other writing, and you write a lot about repositories. And I'm glad that Erin mentioned it, because it sounds like throughout this conversation, you've been talking both about the raising of awareness, the education around research, but a lot of what you're describing, at least now check me here, I hear in, sometimes we call them insights hubs, or sometimes participant panels can have these repository effects, but you have written about research repositories. So I'm wondering if you could connect, if there is a connection, the things you're talking about were in identifying priorities, linking insights that you found to other teams' question points. Could a research repository or an insight hub do that? And if so, how does a small team or a team of 1 go about building that? How have you linked those things in a centralized way? Because again, I'm hearing from a lot of even senior researchers that that's what they spend a lot of their time working on. We have great projects happening and no one knows about them. So you're talking a lot about visibility, transparency, and those bridges. To what extent does a repository help you in that?
repositories are either very related to this or could be a completely different thing. So it depends how you want to, it depends on your context and depends on overall how the team works. And I like, sometimes I like to keep them separate. And I prefer, for example, a research repository where I can go deeper, and then it would be for the research team, and then have this insight hub just for the other teams.
Okay.
And then we can have like two separate processes, depending on how the company said. And if you have maybe, for example, designers, product managers, and other people conducting some sort of research, then this insight hub could also become some sort of repository if you want.
So I guess how would you define each of those things? Because it sounds like they have different functions. So how do you define a research repository? And then how do you define an insights hub? And is one of those more relevant to the work you're describing as like a UXR at one, these early stage moments?
Okay, the insight hub for me, it moves faster, and it moves it's like imagine like a river or like a lake. We have different streams from different rivers. A repository is more like a well, if you want. So it's somehow similar because you need to put water there, and it comes probably from one stream, but it's a standalone thing, I think that repositories, the way also they're constructed in many teams, sometimes leads to its own failure. And probably that's another point. I mean, I'm opening another box now. Okay, are repositories useful or not? and how do you set them up for success? But in terms of differentiating these two, it also depends on how detailed the information that you got from this insight hub is. What happens sometimes, or what I believe is a good way to connect them, if you could triangulate insight from different teams, and you have a triangulated insight, because you don't want to create like a mess of, okay, we'll just put tickets and that's it. This is the insight. Maybe you want to curate a little bit and you want to give some that you could take into the repository. So probably one distinction that we can make is probably in the insight hub, everybody can get their hands dirty. And maybe in the repository, you don't want everybody to get their hands dirty, because then you have different levels of information, or it's incomplete, or have different standards, and it can get super dirty super quickly. But that's just my take. Maybe some others will like, yeah, we want everybody to access and do everything everywhere.
Yeah, but it sounds like, and these could potentially live in the same software, but be different areas of the same thing. But it sounds like there's different use cases, which is the researcher who needs a lot of information and context and raw material to do their magic with. And then the rest of the org who doesn't need and probably shouldn't have all of that most of the time. So really knowing the use case internally in the user and building around that.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's definitely that. And as I said, you can go and maybe the findings or the insight or the input you get from, I don't know, sales, maybe it's not polished. So you want to be the one then curating it, triangulating it, and putting it into the repo. That's probably... And then it can live longer there, and you can then track it. Okay, this was implemented here. This led to this product change. The other one is like is a little more liquid and a little bit like a playground. So you can then, whatever you don't have, you can throw it away. We can change. We can move. That's also another difference, I'd say.
Julian, do you think that people from your experience, or you yourself in the past, tend to over-index on the executing research or the research ops side? Is there a natural inclination there that is maybe not the one you would recommend based on your experience doing this multiple times?
What do you mean exactly with over-indexing? Yeah,
like spending too much time executing on research or spending too much time on the research ops side. Yeah,
definitely. Yeah, that's usually the case. And I think it goes on both sides, like both on the re-ops and the research side. And yeah, I think that when you are the first researcher, you cannot really afford to do that much.
Yeah.
Otherwise, and we go back to, okay, fine, you need to wear different hats, and you need to not only do the work, but also help elevate everybody's work, or help the company understand research better and build infrastructure. So you cannot really afford to say, okay, fine, I'm going to spend 80 hours on this little thingy here, because you just cannot do it. Yeah.
When I think about, I guess, I would imagine many people probably don't do enough ops early enough, but when I think about doing it too early, I think about get a few reps in and know what you're trying to operationalize before you do it, right? Otherwise, you've built a system that has no value to plug into. So don't do it that way.
I'm thinking of a beautiful spreadsheet that's got, tags and organizations, and it has like 2 rows because you've only, to Julian's point, had 2 usability studies come up. Yeah, Erin, that's a really good point.
Yeah. And like in this regard, what I also saw in many cases, researchers tend to actually do that, and because they love the end photo. So repository will look great. So I'll spend all this time doing the taxonomy right away. And it's like, how many research projects have you done? Well, 2, but we will get there,
Right.
So you need to kind of like find a middle ground between building something that will then set you up for success in the future and overkill in the first month, and same with spending. And we can also go for that. We can open that box too. It's okay, fine. When you want to get tooling, okay, fine. Yeah, let's get this one. And then you spend a lot of money and say, okay, most of my budget went here. And then now we have this really expensive repository tool that nobody's using. And I said repository could be other things. Sometimes you also need to take a look at the end photo, but then see and track back what are the steps that you need to take before you get there, right?
Yeah. Where would you put your tool budget first? Recognizing it, of course, depends. But, what are some common good uses of whatever budget you might have early on as a limited team?
Probably a tool for unmoderated testing would be my first thought. A repository you can even build on Google Sheets if you are scrappy enough. And probably if you have CRM or any email marketing tool, I think that's something that I also spend money on. Just because if you want to then reach out to customers, here in Europe, we also need to be mindful of GDPR. So we need to have all the automations in place and have everything kind of like tidy and clean. So investing there is also something that I would recommend right away. Unless you can then share budget with another team and say, okay, fine, we get this good tool. Right. Yeah, probably those are my 2 like no-brainer. Like these are the first thing I would recommend. And then we can see, depending on each case, if you want to go here, you need a repo tool. If you want transcriptions, if you want to do something with AI now, or there's so many things you can try, but that's more case to case kind of basis.
Julian, when you're a team of 1 or a team of fewer than 5, scale is something that we hear a lot about. Researchers' capacity. We've been talking about it with prioritization. In your experience, though, what are the things that you've done to try to scale up the work that you're able to deliver, the insights that you're able to deliver? We've alluded to, we've said outright that research can be informed decisions can be a team sport. Do you find yourself tapping in colleagues and stakeholders? What's your blueprint if you're still a scrappy team and you want to scale up a bit?
Well, in that sense, we have no choice but to kind of touch on the research democratization topic. So what's our, like when you land in a company, okay, what's our take here? What can the company do? What can the team do? And what is the team willing to do? And how do you leverage that? And what are also your recommendations as a researcher? Because you brought it as a specialist here. So do you recommend, okay, everybody can do research. Only this team can do research. Only this team and this team can do this type of research. This is also something that you also need to kind of assess. I mean, there's so much about research democratization and different models and so on. But for me, it pretty boils down to, okay, who else? When you're a team of 1, I mean, you don't have much of a choice at some point, unless you want to do like deliver this bit of work and then go from there. And the company is fine with that. But if you want to do that, and we go back to the playmaker kind of approach that I said at the beginning, if other people are conducting research, any sort of research, how can you help them improve or step up the game? How can you set boundaries? How can you set up how can you help them elevate the game? Because at some point you won't be able to conduct 5 surveys because other teams are doing them. And what can also happen is that even if you don't go there and help them step up the game, maybe the survey is going out anyway. So that's also the case. Sometimes it's like, okay, we're still talking to customers anyway, whether you help us or not. So I think that's something that you need to assess. And for me, the best way to tackle it heads on is, okay, fine. Who's willing to do stuff, or what kind of stuff is happening right now? Who's willing to help out? there might be some people who are not interested. I faced so many designers who are like, yeah, I don't want to talk to people. It's like, I want to go into Figma and just stay in my Figma world, which is completely fine. I mean, it's their choice. It's fine. And actually, I find other people are like, yeah, please, I want to do it. I want to see, I want to test, So you need to also work with people who are actually willing to do so. And then you can then assess your actual, like, not only the research team's capacity, but also the overall company capacity to learn from the customers. And we connect this to the Inside app, so we can have this 360 view of it, right?
You do hear so often that teams of one or small user research teams are themselves also ops teams. I think too often we get trapped in this idea that ops is for a more mature or a bigger organization. I think one of the big reasons we wanted to have you on is because you are both a researcher and an ops person, and maybe you think of those titles in the same way. But I think everything that you've talked about here, so much of it is ops, right? Empowering people through rigorous research, ensuring that there are guardrails so that you're not launch blocking, but you're also enabling them to do things. Everything that you're describing is typically within the purview of a research operations pro. So in your journey to becoming someone who's got both researcher and ops in your title, was that something that just had to happen? You were joining enough companies, finding that like, well, gosh, I need to come up with some best practices around screener questions or what not to ask in an interview so that it's not leading or that we're not, violating a particular information security policy. Could you walk through how that identity, you sort of became the researcher and the re-ops person?
That's actually, the reason I became both is because of my experience as a first researcher. So I've been the first researcher in many companies, and I was not the first one. I was one of the early hires. So I never worked in a team larger than 11 people. So I kind of went always small. And at some point, I think, one time it was chance, second time, well, maybe a bit, and the third time it's not coincidence, and I'm picking these kind of challenges when I change jobs. Plus, I also worked with many companies that wanted research or wanted to, create a research culture, and they had no researcher in-house. So in the end, I had no choice but to learn how to put things in place for myself at the beginning. And then I said, okay, at some point, later in time, I learned this is called research ops, to be honest. So it's like, okay, fine. I don't have a research process. How do we put this together? How do we prioritize? How do we reach out to customers? Where do we store the things that and I was kind of like reading articles or talking to people, but the term ops came later on. And at some point, if you ask me, I feel like the way I feel myself as a research ops specialist is specialized in smaller contexts. That's why everything I create is related to first researchers, small teams of one, because that's been my context most of the time. So yeah, I agree that when you're the first researcher, you're a bit of a hybrid because you have all this bit that is research, and then you have all this bit that is operations. If you're lacking one, you will be like swimming in requests and swimming in projects, and you'll be like, okay, fine, where do I? And if you go the other way, you will probably you will not help the company learn much, in comparison, or it will also prevent your spreading the word efforts to actually, dig deeper, to impact deeper. Because people say like, fine, you talk about how cool is research and how we should be all doing this, but where's your work? It's like, what have you done
right,
here?
Right.
So a bit of both. Yeah.
It sounds like a good rule of thumb is no matter what, you want to be doing some research, generating some insights, but you got to, figure out that exact ratio based on where you are and where your company is. Before we move to our rapid fire section, are there any closing thoughts on building a research team from scratch you want to leave folks with? Definitely do this, definitely don't do this, anything that we didn't cover yet?
The success, for me, the key tip to success is to really, and this is a research project in itself, really understand the context and your team really deeply. And I talk about, asking the right questions during the interview process, asking the right questions during the onboarding. So understanding where you stand and also understanding where you want to go to is definitely going to set you up for success, because if you don't ask, especially when you start, if you don't ask the right questions and you don't understand where you're going, you can then start building many things, but then, you just build a rocket that then sits in your garage. Mm-hmm. So probably the understanding bit is something a lot of people overlook, and they just, because they're excited, because they want to prove their value, because they want to have impact right away. Sometimes, I mean, there are many reasons why this can happen, but really spending time understanding everything when you join a company as a first researcher is the way to go, because this is so context depending. And I mean, most of the answers that of the questions that you ask me are like, okay, it depends. It depends on this. It depends on that. So it depends really exists. So
yeah,
actually knowing what you need to tailor for is actually going to set you up for success.
It depends was on the short list of titles for this podcast, if you can believe it.
I was thinking that this episode could be titled,
yeah,
It Depends Really
it
Does
comes
Exist.
Up a lot.
That's such a great reminder that research is comprised of methods and frameworks and types of evaluative tools, but those don't make a research practice. All the things that you've been talking about do. Good stakeholder relationships, understanding of the business model, where the company does or does not want to go, and then, like you've really done nicely here today, Julian, is describing where you, the researcher, can bring that expertise. And that is actually one thing I wanted to close with is, or one of the final questions I had for you is, I think researchers can sometimes be a little hesitant to make a recommendation or to sort of influence the organization. And it sounds like from your experience, when you're brought in early, there is an opportunity there to do these sorts of things, both to learn, as any good researcher seeks to do, uncover the context of this place I find myself in, but then to say, right, you brought me in because I know how to link feedback that we're getting, these other data inputs, to a recommendation. So I think it's a really great opportunity for folks who are listening, who might not be teams of one. Remember that you have expertise and that you can make those recommendations and shape that context.
Yeah, definitely. I think that you become sort of the orchestrator of insights, and giving a recommendation, because you are the expert at some point. So also don't shy away from recommendations and try to say, yeah, okay, this is the way. Recommendations, whether to tackle a project or not, the way you approach a project and what you should do with the outcome. Okay, this is what we learned. This is what I recommend you doing. Of course, then this is taken into a discussion, and maybe this like the product team with designers, engineers, this gets then play with. But step up and don't be shy to do so. So I think positioning ourselves as some sort of counselor. There's this Dr. Ari Zellman always talks about this role called the consigliere, or the counselor. So you need to position ourselves, in terms of this. And he talks about being the anchor that delivers the news. If his content is great, and there's a lot he talks about in this direction. So like giving recommendations with the right tone and with a strong voice, it's really important for researchers, whether you're a team of one or you are part of a larger team. I think that's something we should never shy away from.
Awesome. Let's hit that rapid fire. 3 questions for you, Julian. First one, and you can say it depends, but then I'll ask you for further clarification. Favorite research question or method?
Okay, I would say it's more a prompt. So it's tell me more about that. I love saying that in interviews. Okay, so tell me more about that. Because it really opens up the game. Or just nodding is also fine, but nodding and the tell me more about that, definitely, yeah.
Tell me more about that. I'm just kidding. I get it. It speaks for itself. Always a great one, and open-ended and inviting and warm and shows interest and all those great things. A few resources that you recommend to folks, either on the topic we talked about today or research in general, blogs, books, etc.
It depends. No, it's no. We can go in terms of research ops. I always point to the research ops community, because they have such a large number of articles. They have the community. You can reach out to people there. So if you want to learn about operations, you can definitely check out there. In terms of research, I have a lot of people that I follow. Apart from, I could recommend some books and so, but there's some people that I follow and whose content I feel super, super valuable. Bezos Siriani, for example, Janelle Ward. These are Ruby Pryor. These are people that I follow, and they have really valuable insights. So I recommend if you can follow them. Some of them post on LinkedIn, some of them post on their blogs. Some of them post on some companies' blogs as guest writers and so you can find them online. But definitely, I would definitely recommend to follow them, because they're really also source of inspiration. Sometimes when you're like, okay, how would they? I try to put myself in their shoes. How would they approach this? How would they think about this? So definitely recommend it.
Awesome. We had Ruby on a couple weeks ago. Nice call out. Yeah. Where can folks follow you? LinkedIn, Twitter, somewhere else?
So they can follow me on LinkedIn. I also have a newsletter, it's blog newsletter at the180.cc. And they can also listen to my podcast that actually launched not long ago, which is called From Finders to Builders. So you can find it on Spotify and YouTube.
Amazing. Thanks, Julian. Thanks so much for being here today.
Thank you so much, Julian.
Thanks for having me. Had a great time.